A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. So Daniel sent us a really heavy-hitting topic for today. He wants to know how the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, actually became powerful enough to essentially franchise militias across the entire Middle East. He specifically asks, were the seeds of this expansion in place from the very beginning, or did the IRGC just sort of stumble into exporting Iran's influence and dogma through active, calculated work? It is a massive question, Herman.
It is the question for anyone trying to understand the modern Middle East. And by the way, before we dive into the deep end of Iranian geopolitics, a quick shout out to our scriptwriter for the day. Google Gemini 3 Flash is powering the dialogue for this episode.
Well, hopefully, Gemini is ready to help us untangle this web because the paradox here is wild. If you go back to 1979, the IRGC was basically a ragtag collection of street militias and students. Their entire job description was domestic. They were the People's Army, meant to stop internal coups and protect the brand new revolution from getting smothered in its crib. But then you fast forward to where we are now, in April of 2026, and the IRGC, specifically the Quds Force, has an operational footprint that looks more like a multinational corporation than a National Guard. They are in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon. They've basically built a foreign legion that manages tens of thousands of proxy fighters.
That shift from protect the home front to run the region is exactly what we need to pick apart. Because if you look at the landscape today, the IRGC's proxy model is essentially the primary driver of regional instability. It is the single biggest hurdle for United States policy in the Middle East because it is so hard to counter. You aren't just fighting a country, you're fighting a decentralized, vertically integrated network of state-within-a-state entities.
Right, and it raises that seeds versus strategy debate Daniel mentioned. Was this a decades-long master plan project to capture the Iranian economy and then export that power? Or did they just get really good at filling power vacuums every time a neighbor's government collapsed?
I think the reality is a bit of both, but the seeds were definitely more intentional than people realize. Even in the early days, they weren't just thinking about Tehran, they were thinking about a global revolutionary mandate.
Well, let's get into the institutional mechanisms and the money behind it. Because a National Guard doesn't just wake up one day and decide to fund a war in Yemen without a very specific kind of infrastructure already in place. Where do we even start with the building blocks of this thing?
You have to look at Article 150 of their own constitution. It explicitly tasks the IRGC with guarding the revolution and its achievements. That is a very open-ended mandate. If you believe your revolution is a universal truth, then guarding it naturally means expanding it. Khomeini was vocal about this by 1980, saying they must strive to export the revolution because the world belongs to the oppressed. It wasn't just a defensive reflex, it was an ideological mission statement from day one.
So the DNA was there, but having a mission statement is one thing. Actually having the capacity to build a foreign legion is another. I mean, look at what happened post-2003 in Iraq. That was a massive power vacuum, and the IRGC moved in like they had a playbook ready to go. Was that just lucky timing, or had they spent 20 years building the specific tools to do that?
It was the playbook. By the time the Iraq War started, the IRGC had already spent 2 decades refining a very specific advisory model. They don't just send in Iranian troops to occupy a city. That's too expensive and creates too much friction. Instead, they outsource the friction. They provide the seeds, the funding, the drone tech, the ideological training, and then they let a local group like the Badr Corps or Hezbollah do the heavy lifting.
It's like a franchise model for insurgency. But you can't run a franchise without a massive bank account that's insulated from the actual Iranian government's budget. I want to dig into that financial pipeline because I think people miss how much the IRGC functions as a massive off-budget conglomerate. They aren't just soldiers, they're CEOs of a shadow economy.
That is the crucial transition. They moved from being a revolutionary militia to an institutionalized power broker by capturing the economy. We need to look at how they used post-war reconstruction in the late 80s to basically swallow the country's infrastructure whole. That economic independence is what gave them the veto over Iranian foreign policy.
It's the ultimate peace dividend irony, right? After the Iran-Iraq war ended in '88, you have this massive, battle-hardened ideological army sitting around with nothing to do. President Rafsanjani thinks he can tame them by giving them construction contracts to rebuild the country. It's like trying to domesticate a tiger by asking it to manage your landscaping business.
That is exactly how Qatam al-Anbiya, or KAA, became the monster it is today. It started as a way to keep the boys busy, but it turned into Iran's largest contractor. We're talking about an engineering arm that doesn't just build roads, they control oil, gas, telecommunications, and major infrastructure. By 2026, estimates suggest the IRGC's economic empire controls 30 to 40% of Iran's total GDP.
Which means they don't have to go to the Iranian parliament with a hat in their hand, asking for a budget to fund a militia in Lebanon. They have their own off-budget ATM. If the civilian government wants to play nice with the West or negotiate a deal, the IRGC can just shrug and say, "That's cute, we're going to keep funding our Foreign Legion with our own oil money."
And that Foreign Legion got a formal name in 1990, the Quds Force. This was the moment the advisory model was institutionalized. They didn't just stumble into proxy warfare, they created a dedicated branch of the military whose entire job description is external operations. They looked at what they did in Lebanon in 1982 and said, let's make this a system.
Lebanon is the perfect case study here. In the early 80s, the IRGC sends 1,500 instructors to the Bekaa Valley. They didn't just hand out AK-47s and leave. They built schools. They built hospitals. They basically replaced the failing Lebanese state for the local Shia population. They created welfare as warfare.
It's a brilliant, if cynical, proof of concept. By providing basic services the actual government couldn't, they bought a level of grassroots loyalty that you just can't get with a paycheck alone. Hezbollah wasn't just a militia, it was a social movement with a military wing. That became the blueprint they've been exporting ever since.
So by the time the 90s roll around, you have a self-funding, ideologically driven organization with a dedicated proxy architect branch in the Quds Force. They weren't waiting for a vacuum to appear. They were building the vacuum filling machine. They consolidated power domestically, so they could project it externally without any internal checks.
That domestic consolidation is the foundation. If they didn't control the docks, the black markets, and the construction firms, the Quds Force would just be a small special ops team. Instead, they're the venture capitalists of Middle Eastern instability. They provide the seed funding and the technical know-how like drone kits and IED designs, while the local proxies provide the boots on the ground.
It's a high-reward, low-risk strategy for Tehran. If a proxy messes up, Iran has plausible deniability. If the proxy succeeds, the IRGC gets a strategic veto over that country's future. But as we saw in the early 2000s, having the machine ready is one thing. Having a massive regional-scale opportunity to use it is another.
And that opportunity arrived with a vengeance in 2003. When the United States toppled Saddam Hussein, it didn't just remove a dictator, it dismantled the entire Sunni-led power structure that had acted as a strategic dam against Iranian influence for decades. The IRGC didn't just watch from the sidelines, they had the Badr Corps, which they'd been nurturing since the 80s, ready to walk across the border and start filling the police stations and ministry offices.
It's the ultimate "I told you so" for their long-term planning. While the coalition was trying to figure out how to keep the lights on in Baghdad, the Quds Force was already treating Iraq like a franchise expansion. They weren't just funding a militia, they were embedding their people into the Iraqi state's DNA. By the time the Popular Mobilization Forces, or PMF, were formalized after the rise of ISIS in 2014, the IRGC had successfully turned a desperate security need into a permanent state-sanctioned Iranian veto over Iraqi policy.
The PMF is the perfect evolution of that welfare as warfare model we talked about. They provide security where the national army failed, and in exchange, they get a slice of the national budget. It's a parasitic relationship where the host provides the funding and the IRGC provides the command and control. Then you look at the 2011 Syrian civil war, and the model scales up even further. The IRGC didn't just send advisors to help Bashar al-Assad, they orchestrated a multinational foreign legion of Afghan, Pakistani, and Iraqi Shia fighters to save the regime.
That's where the axis of resistance stops being a catchy slogan and starts being a vertically integrated military system. In 2026, we're seeing these groups share drone tech, intelligence, and even logistics across borders, as if they're departments in the same corporation. It's a massive contrast to how someone like Saudi Arabia handles regional influence. The Saudis traditionally use a transactional, top-down approach, basically writing big checks to Sunni groups and hoping they stay loyal.
And that's much easier to disrupt. You can outbid a transaction, but it's incredibly hard to out-organize a grassroots social and military infrastructure that's been built over 20 years. The second-order effect here is the creation of these states within a state. Whether it's Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Houthis in Yemen, these entities become more powerful than the actual governments they supposedly serve. It makes traditional diplomacy nearly impossible because the person you're talking to at the United Nations often has zero authority over the guys actually holding the drones and the missiles.
It's a systemic threat because it breaks the fundamental rule of the Westphalian state system, the idea that a government has a monopoly on the use of force within its borders. The IRGC has turned that on its head, creating a reality where the official state is just a shell for their proxy operations. It creates a permanent state of regional instability, because these proxies thrive in the friction. They don't need a functioning country, they just need a functional launchpad.
And that's why we have to stop looking at the IRGC through a narrow military lens. If you only focus on the missiles or the Quds Force operatives, you're missing 2/3 of the machine. The real takeaway here is that they've pioneered a hybrid model where economic control and ideological export are just as load-bearing as the kinetic warfare. When they control 30 to 40% of Iran's GDP through entities like Khatam al-Anbiya, they aren't just a military branch, they are a self-funding transnational conglomerate. Traditional statecraft and sanctions struggle to counter this because the IRGC has built an entire parallel universe of front companies and black markets.
It's basically a revolutionary VC firm that happens to have its own special forces and a seat in the cabinet. If you're an analyst or someone following these regional shifts, you have to treat the IRGC as a transnational corporation with a radical dogma. They don't think in 4-year election cycles, they think in decades of institutional capture. They'll build a school in a Lebanese village today because they know that in 20 years, the kids from that school will be the ones operating the drone swarms.
That's the hybrid threat lens our listeners should be applying. Whether you're looking at the PMF in Iraq or even non-state actors in other parts of the world, ask yourself, are they providing social services? Do they have an independent revenue stream that bypasses the central bank? If the answer is yes, you're looking at the IRGC blueprint.
It's a sobering realization that you can't just defeat this with a better trade deal or a precision strike. You're fighting a system that has spent 40 years making itself indispensable to the local population while simultaneously making the official government irrelevant. It's a total inversion of how we think power is supposed to work.
Which brings us to the future of this model, especially as the technology shifts. We are moving into an era of autonomous drone swarms and sophisticated cyber capabilities that are tailor-made for the IRGC's proxy architecture. You don't need a massive industrial base to cause strategic paralysis anymore. You just need a few hundred specialized kits and a motivated local group to launch them. It lowers the barrier to entry for regional dominance significantly.
It's the ultimate force multiplier. If the IRGC can outsource high-end kinetic capabilities to a group like the Houthis or a militia in Iraq, they get all the strategic benefit with almost total plausible deniability. I do wonder, though, if the axis of resistance hits a wall eventually. You can't run a transnational revolutionary empire forever if the Home Office in Tehran is facing 30% inflation and a population that's increasingly tired of seeing their national wealth shipped off to southern Lebanon or Yemen.
That is the trillion real question. Can the IRGC's economic empire, that 30 to 40% of the GDP they control, actually insulate them from a total domestic collapse? Or does the whole system become a house of cards if the central pillar in Iran finally cracks under the weight of these shifting regional alliances? It's a fascinating, if terrifying, geopolitical experiment.
Well, on that cheery note, we should probably wrap this up before I start looking into building a bunker. Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumintop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes.
And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the infrastructure for this show.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you want to dive deeper into the research Daniel sent over, or find the RSS feed to subscribe, head over to myweirdprompts.com.
See you next time.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the flows from slow